Hey, Mike here. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Dark Poutine early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Welcome back to Dark Poutine. I am Mike Brown.
Do I detect a little bit of illness in your voice, Mike?
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time in hospitals with my dad, and I think I picked something up while I was in Nova Scotia. It wasn't good. He and Mom got sick first, and then my sister and I got sick, so...
You sound like Kathleen Turner.
Romancing the Stone. Anyway, I'm going to go deal with my yelly cat before we get started.
The views, information, and opinions expressed during the Dark Poutine podcast are solely those of the producer and do not necessarily represent those of Curious Cast, its affiliate, Global News, nor their parent company, Chorus Entertainment.
Dark Poutine is not for the faint of heart or squeamish. Listener discretion is strongly advised. We're not experts on the topics we present, nor are we journalists. We're two ordinary Canadian schmucks chatting about crime and the dark side of history. Let's get to it. Put on your toque, grab yourself a double and a Nanaimo bar. It's time to scarf down some Dark Poutine.
You are responsible for obtaining and maintaining at your own cost all equipment needed to listen to Dark Poutine. Dark Poutine can be addictive. Side effects may include, but not be limited to, pausing and questioning the system, elevated heart rate, pondering humanity, odd looks from colleagues as you laugh out loud at work, family members not into true crime worrying about you. Positive side effects may include some perspectives and opinions that you disagree with, as well as some wokeness and empathy. If you don't think Dark Poutine is for you, consult your doctor immediately.
In the quiet Yukon community of Carcross, a chilling tragedy unfolded on March 1st, 1992, forever changing the lives of those involved and leaving a lasting impact on the region. Krystal Nicole Senyk, a 29-year-old with her whole life ahead of her, was found dead in the doorway of her cabin, the victim of a brutal murder. The prime suspect in this heinous crime was Ronald Jeffrey Bax, the husband of Krystal's friend Lynn. In the hours between Krystal's murder and the discovery of her body, Bax, later charged with murder in absentia, vanished without a trace, setting in motion a decades-long search for justice. This case, which has haunted the Yukon for over 30 years, is a tale of tragedy, mystery, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Despite the passage of time, Ronald Bax has never been found, leaving authorities, Krystal's family, and the community with unanswered questions and a continuing need for closure. This is Dark Poutine, episode 342, Still on the Run, The Murder of Krystal Senyk. We want to thank Dark Poutine listener Amélie Drouillet for this case suggestion. We've mentioned the Yukon territories a few times on Dark Poutine. Unless my memory has failed me, we've never covered a case that takes place solely in the Yukon. There are so many corners of this vast land to cover. Even in 342 episodes, we haven't been able to get to them all, and I doubt we ever will. However, the holes in our catalog regarding Canada's Northern Territories are glaring, and I'm trying to rectify that.
You know, I wish there are parts of Canada where we couldn't do a story because nobody got murdered.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be great if all true crime people we just had to give up because all the murders stopped?
Well, what
you and I we could do a gardening show, Mike.
Well, then it wouldn't be Dark Poutine anymore, maybe, you know.
It'd be Green Poutine.
Oh, boy. Anyway, the Yukon Territory, nestled in the far northwest of Canada, has a rich and dramatic history that stretches back thousands of years. Indigenous peoples, including the Tlingit, Tagish, and Han First Nations, were the region's original inhabitants, thriving in the harsh environment and maintaining complex trade networks and cultural practices long before European explorers arrived. These groups, deeply connected to the land and its cycles, relied on hunting, fishing, and gathering for their livelihoods. Their oral histories tell stories of the Yukon's changing landscape and ecosystems over millennia. European exploration of the Yukon began in earnest in the late 19th century. The arrival of fur traders led by figures such as Alexander Mackenzie and Robert Campbell introduced the indigenous peoples to European goods and disrupted existing trade routes. However, the region's defining historical moment came in 1896 with the discovery of gold in Bonanza Creek, a tributary of the Klondike River. This sparked the Klondike Gold Rush, drawing tens of thousands of fortune seekers from all over the world to the Yukon. The boomtown of Dawson City emerged overnight, becoming a bustling hub for miners and adventurers hoping to strike it rich. However, the journey to the Yukon was perilous, with many prospectors braving harsh winters, dangerous mountain passes, and treacherous rivers. Despite the fevered activity, the gold rush was short-lived, and by 1899 the boom had largely subsided, leaving behind a quieter but still important mining industry. In 1898, the Yukon was officially established as a Canadian territory, distinct from the Northwest Territories in response to the rapid influx of settlers. The early 20th century saw the development of infrastructure, with the construction of the Alaska Highway during World War II further opening the territory to the rest of North America. Today, the Yukon remains sparsely populated, with its economy based on mining, tourism, and government services. The territory's natural beauty, including rugged mountains, expansive forests, and pristine rivers, continues to draw visitors from around the world. At the same time, its indigenous peoples play an increasingly central role in the cultural and political life of the region.
You know, I've had this increasing yearning to visit the Yukon.
Me too.
It's really not that far from here, Mike. It's not hard to get to.
We should go.
And a childhood friend of mine, actually, who grew up across the street from me in Strathroy, I think I mentioned before, Robert Postma. He's a famous wildlife photographer that lives up there.
Oh, okay.
So he moved, and anyone I ever meet from the Yukon either knows him or knows who he is. Yeah, he's been on stamps and stuff, right? Polar bear photos, yeah.
Wow.
He grew up in Strathvegas with me.
Strathvegas. Krystal Senyk, the victim of this story, was born in Ontario on the 13th of April 1962 and grew up in part on a horse farm in Fenwick and Pelham in the Niagara region of the province. Pelham is a charming town known for its rich history, scenic landscapes, and strong sense of community. It includes the communities of Fonthill, Ridgeville, and Fenwick, each contributing to the town's rural charm and appeal. Fonthill, the largest community, is renowned for its lush, tree-lined streets and picturesque views of the Niagara Escarpment. Pelham is an agricultural hub celebrated for its fruit orchards, especially its tender fruit farms, which produce local favorites like peaches and cherries. The town also hosts numerous community events like the Pelham Summerfest, drawing residents and visitors to enjoy local culture, music, and food.
Ice wine.
Ice wine.
So it's ice wine region as well, and one of the most famous ice wine brands here in Canada is Henry of Pelham.
Henry of Pelham. I did not know that.
Do you know how they make ice wine?
I don't know. They just put wine over ice?
No, they pick the grapes when they've been frozen outside.
Oh, wow. I did not know that.
Yeah, they pick frozen grapes. Isn't that cool?
It is cool.
Yeah.
Being a non-drinker, I tend not to know these things. After Krystal's stepdad left, it was up to Krystal's mom Vera and her children, Krystal and her half-brother Gord, to care for the farm and its animals. Krystal was unafraid of strenuous physical labor and grew into a strong woman doing her chores around the farm, which included the demanding task of baling hay. Before school, she was up before dawn watering and feeding the horses daily. According to the book I Got a Name by Eliza Robertson, out of necessity, Krystal also became quite the mechanic, able to repair farm equipment and the family pickup. Krystal later moved in with her dad Philip's side of the family, and stepbrother Gord and mom Vera moved to Alberta. In a 2019 interview, brother Gord reminisced about growing up with Krystal on the farm, where they bonded over their love for horses, attending shows and competitions. According to Gord, their time on the farm instilled in Krystal the work ethic and independence she carried through her life. He fondly remembered Krystal and their mother singing together at home and on stage, creating a seamless harmony during which it was hard to distinguish their voices from one another. Krystal was not only physically strong but also intelligent. After graduating high school, she attended university in St. Catharines, where she studied engineering. As she exercised her brain, Krystal kept physically fit and strong.
Doesn't she seem so well-rounded to you?
Very much. Very, very much.
Do you meet these people in life sometimes that have their shit together that they stand out? You know, it's like, wow.
The more I learned about Krystal Senyk, the more I thought, wow, what a cool person.
Yeah.
What an interesting person.
She really, really was well-rounded, that's for sure.
Yeah. Krystal moved to Whitehorse in 1988, where she worked in the city's engineering department. She was often the only woman overseeing all-male work crews doing road work. Sometimes the macho dudes on the crew resented being told what to do by a woman, but quickly learned that Krystal Senyk was no nonsense and really knew her stuff. Krystal was mentioned for her innovative thoughts in news articles in 1989 when, as Whitehorse's utilities technologist, she proposed analyzing samples from an oil pit in the city's landfill for recycling. Krystal had a cabin on Porcupine Creek, a 10-minute drive from the community of Carcross, a small historically significant community about an hour's drive south of Whitehorse. It sits between rugged mountains and the shores of Bennett and Nares Lakes. Named initially Caribou Crossing, it became Carcross in 1904 due to frequent caribou migrations. The area is home to the Carcross Tagish First Nation and reflects a deep indigenous heritage. Known for its natural beauty, including the unique world's smallest desert and turquoise lakes, Carcross is a gateway to the Klondike Gold Rush route. Today, it attracts outdoor enthusiasts with mountain biking trails, scenic hikes, and vibrant indigenous art and culture. Porcupine Creek is surrounded by rugged mountains, dense forests, and alpine meadows. It's home to diverse wildlife including caribou, bears, and moose. Historically, the area saw activity during the Klondike Gold Rush as a route for prospectors, with remnants of this past still visible today. Now famous for hiking, camping, and fishing, Porcupine Creek offers visitors a pristine, scenic experience in the Yukon's wilderness. Krystal loved the outdoors. She hunted grizzly bears, so the property was the perfect place for her. The cabin she'd bought from a man named Rabbit John needed a lot of work. It was full of junk and rabbit turds. Somehow, Krystal also found time to compete in various physical competitions. In February of 1989, she competed to earn cash for window replacements in her Carcross cabin. Krystal signed up to compete in both the arm wrestling and the flower packing competitions for the Yukon Sourdough Rendezvous Festival. She handily won the arm wrestling competition and carried 581 pounds, 263 kilograms of flour 11 meters across the finish line to win $500 in that competition. From the Whitehorse Daily Star on February 27, 1989, quote, victorious at the 581-pound level, Senyk then tried to make a new record with 625 pounds but collapsed after approximately 6 meters. I could feel my knee tingle at 581 pounds, and in the record-breaking attempt, it was too tender on my knee, so I let go, Senyk explained after the competition. Senyk explained that most of her training has come from building her new house. As a matter of fact, I'm going home now to put my sun windows in, Senyk said. End quote. Keeping busy, in July 1989, she won first place in the novice trap shooting tournament in Carcross. She'd also developed a passion for arm wrestling and began competing internationally, coming in fourth in the right-handed women's 174-pound or 70-kilogram weight class at the World Sit-Down Arm Wrestling Championships at the Sheridan Center in Houston, Texas. Krystal was not used to losing at arm wrestling and was impressed by the strength of her competitors. She lost at the semifinal to a Swedish arm wrestler. Americans took the top 2 spots. From the Whitehorse Daily Star on November 5, 1990, quote, "It's the first time I've run into competition. Actually, it's the first time I've ever lost," said Senyk in the phone conversation from Houston. She lost largely due to inexperience, particularly when her American competitors used a tactic she'd never seen before. "One of my Canadian teammates asked me how I was going to counter their back pressure and top roll move, and I said, 'What's that?' That move, in which the competitor changes grips, often during a bout, was the one that sunk Senyk. She opened the championships Friday with a win over the same Swedish girl she lost to in the semifinals, but lost later in the day to an American girl employing the top roll style. Quote, "It was very difficult to hang on to her hand, and that burnt out my arm," end quote.
Yeah, it's really interesting, like her tenacity in this arm wrestling competition, kind of symbolic of, it's really symbolic of her inner strength, you know? And how she, like, you know, looking at her up there in the north, right? She really exceeded sort of societal expectations in sort of this male-dominated setting, right?
100%, yeah.
And she's kind of an unconventional heroine in sort of this sort of rugged region.
Yeah, that's why I found this story. That's why I found this story compelling for that exact reason. Exactly.
Like, she's just fantastic, right?
Mm-hmm. Krystal finished her cabin and moved to Carcross from Whitehorse in 1991. In the years before she was murdered, Krystal left her job at the city of Whitehorse and took a job as an engineer in the Federal Land Claims Office. A federal land claims office manages and resolves land claims by indigenous groups. These claims often involve disputes over historical treaties, land use, or resources. The office facilitates negotiations between the government and indigenous communities to reach agreements to restore land rights, provide financial compensation, or allocate natural resources to address past injustices. By supporting indigenous self-determination and land ownership, the office plays a critical role in reconciliation and upholding the legal rights of indigenous peoples in Canada. It was challenging work, but Krystal loved what she did. Environmentally minded and community-driven, Krystal successfully made her way into municipal politics. In September of 1991, she was elected as a member of the Carcross Council. Krystal's family had first thought Krystal's move was a whim, and the family bet on her swift return. Some gave her a few weeks, others said months, but they were wrong. Krystal loved it up there. She loved the place and loved the people just as much. Stepbrother Gord recalled that Krystal encouraged him and Vera to relocate to the Yukon in the mid-1980s and early 1990s.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like this was just a relocation for her, but it was embracing a lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's you know, the Yukon, I imagine, is demanding but rewarding at the same time.
Yeah.
And it kind of shows, you know, people like Krystal who do that, like, they have a spirit of independence moving up there.
Definitely. Yeah, and it's interesting. So she found it like, here's her spiritual home. So yeah, move my people closer to me because I don't want to go back to Fenwick. Active, involved, and outgoing, Krystal Senyk met and made friends easily. She gifted kittens to a colleague friend's children as their first pets. She was well loved by many people and was an avid and meticulously organized learner, always jotting down her plans and goals, and genuinely loved children. However, one of her very best friends in Carcross was a woman named Lynn Bax, and she'd known Lynn for years. Krystal and Lynn had been best buddies since their time together at Brock University back in Ontario. In fact, it was during a visit with Lynn in the 1980s that Krystal had decided to move to the Yukon. Lynn's husband, Ronald Jeffrey Bax, a sculptor, taxidermist, outdoorsman, wilderness guide, and gun expert, had a hot temper.
Yeah, you don't want to meet a taxidermist with a hot temper.
No, like Norman Bates.
Yeah.
According to friends, Ron was a generally good father who took pride in his family. He once risked his own life to protect others when the brakes of his steamroller failed while working construction in Whitehorse. However, his recklessness sometimes put his family in danger. On one occasion, he took a heavily pregnant Lynn to retrieve an antler from a deer carcass without warning her about the potential presence of a grizzly bear. Their dog inadvertently attracted the bear's attention, and Ron was forced to shoot the animal in self-defense when it attacked him. Lynn was furious at Ron's carelessness, which could have resulted in tragedy and unnecessarily cost the bear its life. Despite what Ron's friends saw, at home he was controlling and violent with his wife and did not like the time Lynn spent with anyone but him, especially Krystal Nicole Senyk. In her book, I Got a Name, Eliza Robertson claims that Ron Bax saw Krystal not just as a close friend of Lynn's, but also a rival, a threat to his continued control over his wife. As well as threatening his wife, Ron blamed Krystal for his marital troubles with Lynn, and he behaved in threatening ways toward her too. Ron banned Krystal from their house, but the pals kept up their friendship despite his orders.
So once again, we see a fragile ego hiding behind a man who blames women for his failures.
Yep.
These stories almost write themselves, Mike.
Yeah.
Partner violence often follows the same pattern of one deeply insecure individual. It's not always the man, but it usually is.
Yeah.
That lashes out because of their own ineptness.
He feels like he's losing control of somebody he wants to control.
Yeah.
That old chestnut. Ron was enraged when Lynn decided to leave him on Boxing Day 1991, especially when he found out Krystal was helping Lynn by scouting out a transition house where she could shelter from Ron's violent tirades. Krystal told a friend that if she happened to be in a local store at the same time as Ron, he would glare menacingly at her, not saying a word. She also claimed he was threatening her by phone. At one point, Ron told Lynn that he could, quote, take Krystal out, and Krystal was in fear for her life.
What kind of person says things like that? It's
an asshole.
It's so far beyond normal human behavior, right? Like we hear this stuff at times on the show, but can you imagine any of your friends or anyone you know saying, quote, they could take someone out, Mike?
I can, because I've heard it.
Well, that's just, oh, God. I hope you're not close friends with whoever said that.
No, I'm not friends with that person at all anymore. Anyway. On February 29th, Lynn moved into a new rental property with assistance from Krystal. The following day, March 1st, Ron unexpectedly arrived at the new house. He insisted on taking their children to an air show, despite the arrangement that visits were supposed to be organized through their mutual friend Suzanne. After some debate, Lynn allowed the boys to go with Ron. Surprisingly, Ron returned with the children just 45 minutes later, much earlier than expected. This premature return was the first indication that something was amiss. An argument ensued outside the house during which Ron made veiled threats, saying Lynn wouldn't be seeing him or the children if she didn't allow him access. This confrontation marked the first time Lynn felt that she truly stood up for herself against Ron. Later that day, the situation became more serious when Ron called out their mutual friend Suzanne. He instructed her to tell Lynn that, quote, the hunt is on, and that he was on his way. This message was particularly alarming given Ron's occupation as a big game hunter and his access to firearms. Concerned for their safety, Krystal drove Lynn and her sons back to the transition home they had only recently left. While there, they awaited the arrival of an RCMP officer to report the incident. When the RCMP arrived, Lynn and Krystal expressed their fears about Ron's threats. Lynn explained the altercation earlier that day and showed one officer Ron's threatening message, which she had written on a tissue. Despite their concerns, the officer advised them to obtain a restraining order, but stated that the police couldn't intervene unless Ron broke the law. The officer offered to look for Ron, but couldn't guarantee finding him or providing an escort for Krystal when she decided to return home. Despite the staff members' concerns and offer of a bed for the night at the transition home, Krystal decided she would go and stay with Suzanne. At Suzanne's house, Krystal spoke with Graham, Suzanne's husband and Ron's friend, who didn't believe Ron would follow through on his threats. He was blowing off steam, they said. Against Suzanne's advice, and despite the apparent danger, Krystal returned to her own home that night. According to Eliza Robertson's book, I Got a Name, Krystal's parting words to Suzanne were, quote, "I'm tired of living my life according to Ron," end quote. More after a quick break. And we are back. Matthew, thoughts so far?
Yeah, it's not often that you have that I've heard of, abusive partners or husbands murdering friends of their partners like this.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, when I first read the script, I kept on mixing up Krystal and Lynn in my head because my expectation that the victim was going to be his partner.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And
usually, I mean, I did some reading around this, and usually the victim will be the person who the narcissist or coercive person believes is responsible for what's going on.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I also kind of question why the RCMP couldn't get involved and haul him in earlier. I mean, he was uttering death threats, and for all I think uttering death threats is against the law.
Mm-hmm.
Like, did they not pull him in at all to have a word with him? Yeah,
Nope.
so there's a failure on the RCMP's part right there.
I went through a similar situation around the same time, the same era, where someone was calling up our house and not saying nice things, and even said that they wanted to kill my mom. So, yeah.
Did you
But
call the police?
Yep.
What did they say?
We can't do anything unless there's a crime committed, and we can't prove that was that person because it was from a payphone.
Interesting.
Yeah, I guess they didn't want to do fingerprinting on a payphone for a death threat.
Ugh, they're too busy doing other things.
Way too busy.
Making Mr. Big stings.
Not the Bridgewater police, no. They're too busy doing other things.
Getting cats out of trees.
Yeah. There's some stories there that I could tell, but I won't.
Getting Mike out of a tree.
No, actually.
Did you ever get stuck in a tree when you're young?
No, I did not.
It's fun.
I may have fell out of a few. On March 2nd, 1992, Suzanne attempted to contact Krystal by phone but received no answer. Krystal hadn't shown up for work either. No one could get in touch with her. One coworker was concerned, especially as Krystal had confided in her friends and workmates about Ron's threats, so the police were called. At 11 a.m. that day, RCMP officers found Krystal Senyk dead in the doorway of her cabin. She'd been shot. Krystal's mother later spoke to the Whitehorse Daily Star about the day she heard Krystal was gone, from a 2016 article by Pierre Chauvin. Quote, "From that day, she remembers her son's call, crying on the phone. She recalls being brought to the airport. She remembers sitting in a wheelchair, looking at planes taking off and landing while waiting for her flight back to Whitehorse. The rest is gone. I don't know how I got home," she said. Losing her 29-year-old daughter hit her, and it hit her hard up to this day. "The shock is unbelievable," she said. "The toll it took on her physical and mental health required her to take medication. I couldn't control my anger," she remembers. "Try and have a life. It's next to impossible. You get around like a zombie." End quote. Suspicion fell on Ronald Bax immediately, but he was gone with the wind. While police searched for Ron, according to the news reports during the immediate aftermath, RCMP had 16 people they were protecting as potential next victims of Ron's. So now he's committed a crime.
This is why I find it so disheartening, right? Like, somebody has to die, and it's not like, oh, now they're just acting for that one person. but there's 16 people. Like, if there was something that concerned them that much, why were they not involved before somebody got murdered?
I agree.
Like, from 0 to 100, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, we saw that in Nova Scotia with Gabriel Wortman when, everybody knew he had RCMP cars. Everybody knew he was violent. Everybody knew he had guns, but nobody did anything about it until he shot all those people.
Mm-mm.
Just bonkers. RCMP Staff Sergeant Mick Ryan updated the Whitehorse Daily Star on their ongoing search for Ron Bax and other precautions and investigative actions. The day after they discovered Krystal's body, police removed an unnamed person from the Yukon government building for their safety. They conducted searches of several Whitehorse homes in connection with the case, including Krystal's house and Ron Bax's. Around 6 p.m., the emergency response team entered Ron's residence on Tagish Road but could not locate him. As a precautionary measure, police seized several rifles from the home. The search expanded to the areas surrounding the two residences but was suspended around 9:30 p.m. due to challenging winter conditions. Sergeant Ryan noted that the frozen snow and high winds hampered tracking efforts, particularly for the police dog team. Authorities said that they believe Ron may be alone or accompanied by one other person, as his vehicles were found at his residence. It was unclear whether he escaped in an unknown vehicle or on foot, but given his extensive experience as a hunter and outdoor guide, he could be anywhere and most likely able to survive in the woods on his own for some time. Ryan mentioned that there is a 9-hour window of unaccounted time between when Krystal was last seen and when her body was discovered.
You can get far in 9 hours, especially if you have a car that nobody expects to see you in, or a snowmobile or something like that.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, this was in the winter time. Yeah, he could have taken off in a snowmobile.
He could have done so many different things that, and he was an outdoorsman, so he knew his way around. The investigation mobilized significant resources, including helicopters, planes, and 25 officers. Krystal had suffered a fatal gunshot wound from a high-caliber rifle. Her body was flown to Vancouver for an autopsy. Over 200 people attended Krystal's funeral. Reverend Don Lewis of the Whitehorse United Church honored her love for sports, the outdoors, engineering work, and dedication to the community and indigenous land claims. Tim Kopke, a federal land claims negotiator, praised Krystal's mental, physical, and moral strength. According to those who knew her, she had a great sense of humor, was deeply loyal, adored children and dogs, renovated her own home, and enjoyed playing music.
She was sort of the best of us, wasn't she? Someone like that in a small community is big.
Yeah. 3 days after Krystal was found deceased, Ronald Jeffrey Bax was charged with first-degree murder in absentia. Ronald Bax's family called for him to surrender from their family home in Walkerton, Ontario. An all-points bulletin was issued across Canada and Alaska, and border crossings were alerted. There was no sign of Ronald Bax, and police are still looking for him. In November of 1992, Krystal's family was flummoxed that they still had not seen Krystal's autopsy report. Police told them it was being held back due to an ongoing criminal investigation, but it seemed a moot point by then. They hadn't found Ron. Krystal's mom, Vera, said she doesn't care if it takes 50 years. Ron Bax must be brought to justice. This case first aired as a special bulletin on the December 1st, 1995 episode of Unsolved Mysteries. According to the Unsolved Wiki, initially the case would be featured as an entire segment with interviews and reenactments. However, complications arose while trying to obtain consent from all parties involved. As a result, the case was featured as a special bulletin instead. Police received over 130 tips as a result of the broadcast. Unfortunately, none of them led to Ron Bax. Police now suspect that he had help fleeing the area. However, no accomplices were ever identified. In 2009, the RCMP had composite sketches made to show how he would look in his 50s. Krystal's mother was recently interviewed about the case, and she still hopes Ron Bax can be found. In his blog, after following the case for a few years, Journalist Miles Dolphin had two theories about what happened to Ronald Bax. Theory 1. Bax escaped and died by suicide. There is substantial evidence supporting this theory. In a November 2016 email, RCMP Constable Thur acknowledged working under the assumption that Bax was alive, but noted the probability of Bax dying by suicide in the wilderness was higher than his escaping to another country. Several factors lend credence to this theory. Approximately 6 weeks before the murder, Bax killed his dog Cato, telling a friend that the dog, quote, didn't feel a thing. Cato's remains were later found during the manhunt, shot in a manner causing instant death. Bax reportedly experienced extreme mood swings and was described as increasingly despondent by a close friend. He had threatened suicide weeks before the murder, with a friend intervening after witnessing Bax put a gun to his head. At the time of the murder, Bax was essentially broke. His truck, wallet, ID, outdoor gear, and what could be considered a suicide note were found at his home. In 2018, an Access to Information and Protection of Privacy (ATIP) request revealed that RCMP psychologists Dr. Muser and Dr. Roy, after reviewing Bax's profile, believed there was a 70% chance he had died by suicide. A subsequent ATIP request for the profile analytical review and suicide note was denied on regulations protecting information obtained during lawful investigations related to crime detection, prevention, or suppression. Try to get an access to information request done in Canada. It's impossible when it comes to criminal investigations, even solved ones. It's frustrating. Anyway, theory 2 is that Bax escaped and is in hiding. Ronald Bax was highly familiar with the wilderness and weapons, having worked as a big game guide. Police acknowledged in March 1992 that Bax had taken some gear from his home before disappearing. Despite an all-points bulletin issued across Canada and Alaska, Bax had a head start on law enforcement. RCMP Sergeant Bill Cameron noted Bax's firearm proficiency and extensive knowledge of the Carcross area from his guiding experience. Constable Thur, who long investigated the case, operated under the premise that Bax was still alive, following up on tips and exploring investigative avenues. The RCMP's webpage on Bax cites the possibility he may be hiding in the U.S., particularly in Michigan, where he has family. Unconfirmed reports suggest Bax had an older, wealthier brother in Michigan who had visited the Yukon shortly before the murder. Other speculations point to potential hideouts in New Mexico or countries like South Africa, Austria, and Germany, where Bax allegedly had hunting connections. Constable Thur reported receiving several tips annually about Bax's whereabouts. However, Bax's family in Michigan and Ontario have denied contact with him since before the murder. As of 2018, the case was no longer under Thur's purview due to departmental changes. In early 2018, the Yukon government announced funding for a new historical case unit to investigate unsolved homicides and missing persons cases, potentially impacting the ongoing search for Ronald Bax. Of the many leads was one in Clarksdale, Mississippi, a man matching Ron Bax's description with no ID, who spoke in a northern accent and refused to give a name, was questioned by the Coahoma County Sheriff's Office. Bax's prints were sent and checked against the man's, but they were not a match. Police continue to encourage anyone with information on Bax's whereabouts to contact the Yukon RCMP Historical Case Unit. Ronald Jeffrey Bax was born on November 25, 1961. At the time of his disappearance, he weighed 150 pounds. He was 5 feet 7 inches tall. He had blonde hair, blue eyes, and a mustache. He has a tattoo of a winged horse on his upper right arm. The webpage for RCMP file 92GE08697 describes Ronald Bax and has a warning, quote, "Take no action to apprehend this person yourself. Report any information to the nearest RCMP detachment or the police in your area, or contact Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477. Bax is considered to be armed and dangerous," end quote. For a deeper dive, check out the book I Got a Name, The Murder of Krystal Senyk by author Eliza Robertson.
So, Mike, question for you.
Yes.
I Googled how do I get help if I am abusive?
If you are abusive, if you are the abuser, okay.
And it came up with support for a lot of support for abused people.
For victim support, yeah.
And I don't know if some asshole like this could have gotten support, but there's as a society, there's so much focus on, and I can understand it, right? Because if somebody's being abused and needs support, right, it's probably imminent and critical that they get it. So I get that, but
it's also imminent and critical for the abuser to get help if they want it.
Yeah, and I don't know if they would, but I'm just thinking God, is there a way we can, so often we focus on, it's often men abusing women, right? And we focus on how we get the women help, but how can we give? I think nobody grows up wanting to be an abuser. Right?
I don't think so, no.
How can we get, and this isn't about sympathy for abusers, right? I'm not going, oh, poor.
No, I know that's not where you're going
But I'm like, well, as a society, if we could sort of nip this in the bud somehow before it happens, or if something, because, I've been in situations where I've helped friends get out of relationships who were abusive, and it started small and it grew.
Yeah.
How can, when it's small, right? When it's initial, before it gets bad, before it leads to murder, how can we nip it in the bud and try to stop these men, sometimes women, from doing it, right?
Yeah.
It's
a good question.
I wonder if it would be effective. I wonder if there's a way of doing it that would be effective. So we're stopping it before it even happens, right? Interesting.
Maybe that's one for us to think about.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? It's but the flip side of that is, but that it's sort of a defeatist attitude, thinking, well, guys like this wouldn't want the help. Well,
maybe they realize what they're doing in the back of their minds is wrong. It's like being an alcoholic or being a drug addict or whatever. You feel like what you're doing is not okay, but you can't stop.
Or if the guy's friends know that, because, often people know that's happening. If somebody's friend or colleague or family member knows how to get this person some mental health
assistance,
intervention, right, to try to stop it. You know what I mean? Anyway, It's just a thought. So often it's, and I get it. I get why there's the abuse stuff comes up first, for people who are in it, because they need help right away. But I'm I would love to see more opportunities for if somebody if somebody in my building, if I knew they were abusing, either also try to get them to stop, right?
Yeah.
On a professional level, as opposed to just going and threatening to beat the shit out of him if he doesn't stop. Because I've been there before as well.
Yeah, I'm going to give you a taste of your own medicine if you don't stop doing what you're doing.
I've been there. Yeah.
Yeah, but that doesn't solve anything except sort of perpetuate more violence and anger and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but you really want to do it sometimes.
Yes. And that's it for Dark Poutine episode 342. Still on the run, the murder of Krystal Senyk.
That's right. It's time for voicemails. You can leave us a message at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you. Let's see who called us this week.
All right, here's our first voicemail.
Hi, Mike. Hi, Matthew. And of course, Steve, who is a good dog. Of course, it's you. My name is Kevin. I'm calling from Waterloo, Ontario. When one of my other podcasts finished, Spotify started playing your episode 326, British Home Child Migrant Scheme. I enjoyed the episode and decided to go back and check out your show, how your show evolved. Like many of your listeners, I'm a driver and have lots of time on the road with my own thoughts. I started listening in August of 2024, but I'm now caught up to your current episodes. It was very surreal hearing you talk about CrimeCon Miami 2020, how you were looking forward to it and knowing what was about to happen to the world with COVID. Then watching your progression through the pandemic from the initial jokes about, oh, there's this COVID thing, to the separation of you and he who must not be named. Then watching your bubble come into play and masks and cancellations, then rebirth, for lack of a better word. When I heard the first Halloween and Christmas specials, I laughed and started telling my family and friends that they had to listen to this. Matthew's disclaimer became very relevant. I have a friend who's an RCMP and used to be in Surrey, so I told him I was listening for his name on any of the shows and hoping he was a good egg, and he said, leave it to you to listen to black website, listen to white crimes about a guy by a guy named Brown. All I said was, so you listen. I almost stopped listening on episode 300. That was such a hard case to listen to. I have a son who's a similar age as Daniel and was on a similar search for who he is. But when you followed up with his mother, Sarah, on part 2, all was right again in the world, even though it wasn't for them. My heart goes out to her, and my admiration for her is immense. Quick side note, I worked security for 30 years as a second job, creepy old hospitals like Shadok McMaster in Hamilton, up by where Matthew went to college. And when you did the Bosma case, I shivered because I was security at the airport hangar while the police were collecting evidence. I was just outside making sure nobody went in or out, but creepy as well. So many episodes had a personal ring for me from my days working at McDonald's when I was a kid, having migrated from Bermuda. I recognize a lot of the places that you were talking about on that tragic episode. I was in the armed forces for a short time and was a nurse for 16 years. You give so much respect to all the victims, their jobs, their families. Thank you. Matthew does not have to give me a job because odds are I may have done it already. Thank you again, and go take a deuce in your bonnet.
Kevin is a Renaissance man.
Really so. Yes, very much. That's great. Like, that is probably the most glowing review that the show has ever had.
I wonder, so Kevin outed himself as a truck driver, yeah?
Mm-hmm, yes, he did.
I wonder if he drives one of those orange trucks, the Schneider ones, because I've been told that the Schneider truck drivers, they're quite gentlemanly, and he sounds like a gentleman. Yeah,
he sounds like a great guy. Kevin, yeah. If you ever drive to BC,
come visit us.
Hit us up. Yeah, really.
We'll go out to a local poutineery.
Or we'll just go for coffee. Because I'm watching my girlish figure, so
I'm watching your girlish figure too.
Oh,
Mike.
Boy. I shouldn't say that. Girlish figure is so weird and antiquated.
Yeah, but it's fun.
It's fun. Well, thank you so much, Kevin. That really means a lot. Really, really does. Yeah, it's crazy to hear that someone started in August and is caught up already. That's a lot of episodes to pour through.
Well, Kevin's putting lots of hours on the road by the sounds of it.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike.
Yes, Matthew.
Never mind. We'll do it.
I threw you off.
We'll do it in the after show.
No, you have to do it now.
Hey, Mike.
Yes, Matthew.
You did a scary corn maze last night, didn't you?
I did a scary corn maze last night.
Was it fun?
It was fun. And how about this? Let's talk about it in the after show.
Okay. Did they spell it maze with a Z or A-I-S-E?
No, it was maze with a Z.
Okay.
Even though I was with an indigenous person.
Corn maze.
Yes. All right, here's our second voicemail.
Hey, fellas, this is Sarah in Melbourne, Florida. I just wanted to give a quick thanks to all the Yumber Yarders who put up some nice well wishes for all of the Florida folk. I have been fortunate. We did get hit by Milton, but did not have any major damage to our home, thank goodness. My mother, not as lucky. There was over 170 tornadoes triggered by Hurricane Milton. So even though she wasn't in the path, her house was hit by a tornado. So I've got a house guest, but I've got her, and that's the important part. So thanks again. I just wanted to say I was listening to the Quebec ice storm disaster as I was preparing for Milton, and we have an enormous amount of gratitude in our hearts and minds that we fared better than so many others. So thanks again for the show and for keeping me sane in all of this, and go take a Duke in your toque. Bye, guys.
Wow. So I'm glad you're okay and that your house fared okay, and it's sad that your mom's house did not. Hit by a tornado. Can you imagine, Matthew, having your house hit by a tornado? Like, it would more than suck. It'd be like I'm in the basement and you hear your house just being torn apart kind of thing while you're terrified that maybe it's going to reach you where you are or whatever. I don't know how she got out of it or where she sheltered, but I'm certainly grateful that she was okay enough to come and visit. Holy smokes. Do you want to give Sarah a job, Matthew?
I think she creates retrieval systems for the military.
Retrieving what, though? What specifically?
Like submarine detection systems and stuff like that.
Oh, okay. So,
because I know that like her city actually has a lot of military industrial complex sort of companies. So
okay,
I'm thinking she's some sort of mad scientist for war machines.
Oh, there you go. Well, thanks, Sarah, for
keeping us safe.
Keeping us safe.
Yeah, exactly.
Hi, Mike and Matthew. I just thought I would give a call in and say hi. My name's Ivy. I have been listening to you guys since 2020, on and off. I like to take my binge sprees where I switch between different podcasts and watch listen to many episodes at once. So I am a little bit behind when it comes to where I am listening. But I did want to let you guys know that I just love what you do. I love what you talk about. It's not just true crime and dark history, which I love, but it's also just about what it is to be Canadian, grow up in Canada, and even all the political stuff that you guys talk about, you always make it in the best form of light, if that makes sense. As someone from a super, super rural community in Ontario, it makes me really happy to hear the things that you guys say and your opinions on things, and just knowing that we as Canadians are a pretty close-knit community. As someone who lives in a rural community, there are lots of issues that arise living in the country. So it's really nice when you guys bring up those kind of topics as well, because I think a lot of people don't really know what kind of goes on in these really small towns and villages. So thank you so much, and go shit in your hat.
Thank you so much. Rural Ontario, Matthew. Whereabouts in rural Ontario do you think?
I'm not sure, but she's one of my people, isn't she?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
I wonder if she's in southwestern Ontario.
Could be.
But,
Could be.
It's. I'm wondering. What's really interesting in Ontario is, in southwestern Ontario anyway, is that this cities and towns are getting so much bigger. Like every time I visit, so much of the farmland, like outside of London, Ontario, is now suburbs of London, Ontario.
Yeah.
And my hometown is actually like 15 minutes closer to London, Ontario than it was in the 1970s. You know what I mean? But I think with Ivy, I like to think that Ivy lives in one of the beautiful, not Goderich, but one of those like really beautiful towns in Ontario with the old buildings. And I like to think that she has a little corner shop, and she just sells like delicious sort of fetishist sort of things, like gorgeous little tins of licorices and stuff like that.
Oh, that sounds nice. I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
There was a place called New Ross in Nova Scotia, and they had a farm that is kept kind of as an older farm, so it's really interesting. So you would go there, and they had a little shop. They have a cafe now, but when I was growing up, they had a little shop with candy and that kind of thing from the era as well. So different kinds of licorice and suckers and all kinds of weird things that you don't normally see elsewhere today.
And it's interesting what she says about us, touching on smaller rural communities as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering what she's talking about, and I'm thinking I think we've talked often about, and it's actually somewhat in this case as well that we just did in today's episode, of everybody knows everything, and to get help sometimes is difficult, right?
Right.
And how there's no secrets and there's rumor mills, and if you have a few bad cops in your local community, there's not much you can do.
There's nowhere to reach out because the bad guys are the good guys. Yeah.
And sometimes like these sort of pastoral settings have sort of a dark underbelly, right?
Yeah, it's true. That's it for this week's voicemails. Again, you can leave us one at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you, even if it is just to say hi and to tell us to go shit in our hats. If you're stumped for what to chat with us about, a quick story is welcome. Okay, on to PayPal and Patreon, Donut Money Donors and Patreon. Wow, Matthew, it's been a while. I've been back home in Nova Scotia, and then I realized today I hadn't been posting Patreon episodes because I was,
traveling.
Well, I was focusing on my dad, right? Which is
and 2 days of travel.
Yes, 2 days of travel, but
out of a week.
Yeah. Okay, we have some new patrons this week. First up, we have Danica Ferlazzo, and Danica is from Bayswater in Australia. Australia, Bayswater, Australia. And what do you think Danica does there in Australia,
I actually know Danica
Matthew?
At my local pet food store. But I call her Eunice, and she hates it because I couldn't remember her name, so I nicknamed her Eunice. So I'm going to nickname Danica Eunice and say that she works at a pet supply store. Yeah.
She works at
and
a
she
pet
does
supply
it because
store.
Of her love of
there you go.
Doggos and cats and snakes and rabbits and on all those things.
So I'm cool. So I just sent you something on. I texted you something. So, how do you think that's pronounced? In the UK, it'd be Leicester, right? Okay. Yeah. And if somebody wants to correct us,
that's
then
where my
they can,
stepfather's from Leicester.
Like, there you go. Next up, we have Joseph Boyd Fellows from Leicester, North Carolina, in the United States of America. Joseph Boyd Fellows. And it's spelled like Leicester, but we know the British spelling is Leicester.
My stepfather is from Leicester, so let's call it UK, so let's call it Leicester.
We spell color with a U, so we pronounce that place like Leicester from the UK. So what do you think Joseph Boyd Fellows does that? What a great name. I want to say that name a bunch of times. Joseph Boyd Fellows.
Joseph Boyd Fellows. He's like he's double-barreled last name, so he sounds very British, actually.
He does.
Joseph Boyd Fellows from Leicester.
Yes.
I think he's a footballer, like a British soccer player.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because Leicester did really well a couple of years ago, and my stepfather still goes on about it because he's been waiting for something like 40 years for them to do well.
Yeah, that's a long time.
So Joseph is a famous footy player.
A famous footy player. Well, thank you, Joseph, very much. Next, we have Sarah Grace Gurney, and Sarah is from and she put this into her Patreon, little town of Powell River, BC.
Powell River.
Powell River. I've been there. Have you been to Powell River, Matthew?
I have not.
Okay. Yeah, Powell River is worth a visit. I like little towns.
It's up there, isn't it?
Powell River is not really up there.
Well, is it further than North Vancouver?
It's further than North Vancouver, yes.
Then that's far for me.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
Powell River, British Columbia.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's quite... I'm looking at photos of like a cabin on a mountaintop. It's quite beautiful.
It is a city. It's an actual city, so it's not really a town. 13,000 people, but...
Okay.
Yeah. Established in 1912.
1912.
Yes, incorporated in 1955. So
I wonder how many generations Sarah is a Powell Riverite.
Who knows? What does she do there, though?
Bike riding tours.
Bike riding tours.
Mountain bike tours.
Oh, that sounds fun.
Yeah.
Are you sure there's mountains in Powell River, Matthew?
I'm looking at photos, and yes, there are.
Okay, there you go, just to make sure.
Well, there's one I'll put it this way, there's one in the background.
There's one in the background. Well, There you go. Oh, boy. And that is it for Patreon and Donut Money donors this week. But thank you to everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, much appreciated. And yes, patrons, I will get back to posting, and I'll post all those episodes that I hadn't done yet. Sorry about that, but yeah. Yeah, I couldn't think about anybody but my dad. So anyway, it's an excuse, but it's a good one. Thanks to all our patrons and Donut Money donors, past and present, for your generosity. It helps to keep the show going. You can become a patron of Dark Poutine at patreon.com/darkpoutine. For a one-time donation, you can send us donut money via PayPal using our email address, darkpoutinepodcast@gmail.com. If you don't already subscribe to the show, it would mean a lot if you did. You can easily find Dark Poutine on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. If you haven't gotten yours yet, my book, Murder, Madness, and Mayhem, is available to order via a link on the Dark Poutine website. And speaking of darkpoutine.com, please check it out for show notes and other cool stuff. We'd appreciate it if you took the time to give Dark Poutine a like or a follow on Facebook and Instagram. Most importantly, thank you for listening, and tell your friends about us. Word of mouth is a powerful thing. And that's it for this episode of Dark Poutine. So until next time, don't forget to be a good egg and not a bad apple.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.